Good morning, third grade. Our targets for today are: I will identify the greater amount, lesser amount, and difference in a compare story problem. And I will solve compare story problems with a missing greater amount, missing lesser amount, or a missing difference using a tape diagram. You know that in a compare problem, there are two amounts. Both of the amounts are whole amounts. Compare problems have two whole amounts and no parts. In a compare problem, the two whole amounts are compared to find the difference between the two amounts. How many more or how many less? You know that compare means to tell how two amounts are different. The greater amount in a compare problem is the larger whole amount. The lesser amount in a compare problem is the smaller whole amount. The difference is the distance between the greater amount and the lesser amount. Compare problems always have difference words. The difference words are important key words that show us we are comparing two amounts. Difference words are the clues that let us figure out the greater amount, the lesser amount, and the difference. Identifying the difference words should be your first step when solving a compare problem. Identifying the difference words shows you that it is a compare problem, and it will be the key to unlocking the information in the story problem. We will see lots of different compare words or difference words when we're solving compare story problems. Some examples of common difference words include more than and fewer than. You can see here, this group of Skittles has more Skittles than this group of Skittles. This group of Skittles has fewer Skittles than this group of Skittles. More than and fewer than are compare words because they show that you're comparing two things. When you have more of one thing, it means you have fewer or less of another thing. Other common difference words are greater than and less than. Here you can see in this picture, there is a greater number of fish than this picture. In this picture, you can see there is a less number of fish than this picture. Here there are more fish and here there are less fish. Greater than and less than are words that show we're comparing because if one amount is greater, the other amount has to be less. Other common difference words would be taller than and shorter than. You can see that this tree is taller than this tree. This tree is shorter than this tree. When one thing is taller, the other thing is shorter. Taller and shorter are also difference words because they show that we're comparing the height of two items or how tall two items are. Another set of common compare words would be larger than and smaller than. This elephant is larger than this elephant. This elephant is smaller than this elephant. Larger and smaller are difference words because they show we're comparing the size of two different items. If one item is larger, the other one has to be smaller. If one item is smaller, the other has to be larger. These are all examples of difference words. There are other difference words that are not on this page as well. Difference words are words that show we're comparing two things. Difference words often include the word than, but not always. Difference words are the key to understanding any compare problem. Let's go ahead, third grade, and now look at three problems. We're going to use the difference words to figure out which piece of information is the greater amount, which piece of information is the lesser amount, and which piece of information is the difference. I'm going to read the problem, and we're going to find the two pieces of information as well as the difference. We'll find the two pieces of information as well as the question. Here's the problem. Donovan has 108 less shells in his collection than Jalen. If Jalen has 327 shells, how many shells does Donovan have in his tank? I can clearly see that one piece of information is that Donovan has less shells in his collection. Here's the problem. Donovan has 108 less shells in his collection than Jalen. If Jalen has 327 shells, how many shells does Donovan have in his collection? I can clearly see that one of the pieces of information is that Donovan has 108 less shells in his collection than Jalen. The other piece of information is that Jalen has 327 shells. And the question is asking me, how many shells does Donovan have in his collection? Right away, third grade, we're going to read this problem again, and we're going to look for those difference words, the words that show we're comparing two different items. I'm going to read it again, and I'm going to be listening carefully to hear the difference words that show we're comparing. Donovan has 108 less shells in his collection than Jalen. If Jalen has 327 shells, how many shells does Donovan have in his collection? I immediately heard the compare words, less than. I know that if one person has less than another person, it means they have different amounts. It means we're comparing. One person has less and the other person has more. Those compare words, less than, are going to help me figure out the greater amount and the lesser amount. I also know, third grade, that the piece of information that includes the difference words is almost always the difference, not the greater amount or the lesser amount. That tells me that this piece of information, Donovan has 108 less shells in his collection than Jalen, is not the greater amount or the lesser amount. It's the difference between the two. I have now identified the difference in this story problem. I just need to figure out which amount is greater and which amount is less. In this story problem, the two things we're comparing, third grade, are Jalen's shells and Donovan's shells. And we're trying to see. So I know that one of the amounts is Jalen's shells and the other amount is Donovan's shells. I just need to figure out who is the greater amount and who is the less. Now I know that Jalen has 327 shells. It tells me that here. That's a lot of shells, but it doesn't necessarily mean that she has the greater amount. We still need to figure that out. I don't know how many shells Donovan has. The question is asking me about that. How many shells does Donovan have in his collection? I know that the unknown information will be the shells Donovan has. I'm just not sure yet if Donovan's shells are the greater amount or the lesser amount. We're going to look back at the difference to figure this out. The difference is telling us that Donovan has 108 less shells in his collection than Jalen. If Donovan has less shells, then that means that Jalen has to have more. Donovan has less shells, so Donovan is the lesser amount. If Donovan's the lesser amount, then Jalen has to be the greater amount. The question, how many shells does Donovan have in his collection, is asking about the shells Donovan has. It's asking about the lesser amount. Jalen's shells has to be the greater amount because Donovan is the lesser amount. So we have now used our key difference words to figure out the greater amount, lesser amount, and difference in this problem. Let's go ahead and look at another problem, third grade, and practice using those difference words to determine the greater amount, lesser amount, and difference again. I'll read the problem. You think about the two pieces of information and the question. Nadim and Ty are collecting bouncy balls. Nadim has 160 bouncy balls. Ty has 21 more bouncy balls than Nadim. How many bouncy balls does Ty have? I'm going to read this problem again and circle the information and underline the question. Nadim and Ty are collecting bouncy balls is not a piece of information because there's no number. But I do know that Nadim has 160 bouncy balls. I also know that Ty has 21 more bouncy balls than Nadim. The question in this problem asks, how many bouncy balls does Ty have? I'm going to read the problem again, and you're going to listen very carefully for the difference words that show we're comparing two numbers. Here we go. Nadim and Ty are collecting bouncy balls. Nadim has 160 bouncy balls. Ty has 21 more bouncy balls than Nadim. How many bouncy balls does Ty have? What are the difference words that you hear in this problem? What words show we're comparing two things? You're right. The difference words in this problem are more than. we know that Ty has 21 more bouncy balls than Nadim. Now, third grade, I want you to think about what I told you about the difference words. The piece of information that includes the difference words is always the difference. Yes, because this piece of information, Ty has 21 more bouncy balls than Nadim, includes the compare words or difference words more than. I know that that piece of information is the difference. It's not telling me how many balls Nadim has or how many bouncy balls Ty has. It's telling me the difference between the two. Ty has 21 more than Nadim. We have now determined the difference in this problem. We just need to determine the greater amount and the lesser amount. The two things that we're comparing, of course, are Nadim's bouncy balls and Ty's bouncy balls. We know that Nadim has 160 bouncy balls. It tells us that right here. And we do not know how many Ty has. The question's asking us about that. It's what we're trying to figure out. How many bouncy balls does Ty have? I can't just compare the two numbers because I don't know how many Ty has. So I have to use the clues in the difference to figure out if Nadim or Ty is the greater amount. The difference is telling me that Ty has 21 more bouncy balls than Nadim. Oh, Ty has more bouncy balls than Nadim. That means that if Ty has more, Nadim has less. Now that we know that information, third grade, who has the greater amount of bouncy balls? Ty or Nadim? You're right. Ty has the greater number of bouncy balls because he has more than Nadim. So that tells me the question, how many bouncy balls does Ty have, is asking us to find the greater amount. Since Ty's bouncy balls has to be the greater amount, Nadim's bouncy balls have to be the lesser amount. When one piece of information is the greater amount, the other one has to be the lesser amount. If Ty has more, Nadim has to have less. That's how comparing works. Now, third grade, we have determined the greater amount, lesser amount, and difference in two problems. Let's try just one more, using those key difference words to determine which piece of information is the greater amount, which is the lesser amount, and which is the difference. Here's the problem. There are 107 first graders at UPP. UPP also has 111 third graders. How many more third graders are there at UPP than first graders? I'm going to read it again, and we'll circle the information and underline the question. There are 107 first graders at UPP. That's a piece of information. UPP also has 111 third graders. That's another piece of information. How many more third graders are there at UPP than first graders? That's the question we're being asked. How many more third graders are there at UPP than first graders? Now, third grade, I'm going to read the problem again. I want you to identify the difference words that show we're comparing two numbers. There are 107 first graders at UPP. UPP also has 111 third graders. How many more third graders are there at UPP than first graders? What are the difference words in this problem? Yes, the difference words in this problem are more than. Those difference words show that we're comparing two amounts and that there are more third graders than first graders. Now, third grade, I want you to think. Since the question includes those difference words, more than, is the question asking us to find the greater amount, the lesser amount, or the difference? Yes, because this question, how many more third graders are there at UPP than first graders, includes the difference words more than. That tells me that this is the difference. The question is asking us to find the difference. Now, third grade, we need to figure out which is the greater amount and which is the lesser amount. We know our two amounts are the number of first graders and the number of third graders. We can use the key words in the question to help us. This problem is also unique because we know how many first graders there are, 107, and we also know how many third graders there are, 111. It's easy for us to look at those numbers and see which one is greater or smaller, but we can also use the keywords to help us. We know that there are more third graders than first graders. So third grade, what's the greater amount? First graders or third graders? Yes, the greater amount is third graders because it's telling us there are more third graders than first graders. We also know that third graders are the greater amount because there are 111 third graders, which is more than 107. the number of first graders. First graders are the lesser amount. So third grade, we have determined the greater amount, lesser amount, and difference in this problem. Now third grade, let's talk a little bit more about how we would actually solve compare story problems once we've determined the greater amount, lesser amount, and difference. You know that we represent compare story problems using a tape diagram. Here is an example of a tape diagram with the greater amount on top, lesser amount on bottom, and the difference in the bottom as well. Remember, we always put the difference in this section with this dotted line because the difference isn't a real amount. It's simply the difference or distance between the greater amount and lesser amount. Now, third grade, here's what you need to know. When you're ready to solve a compare story problem, if the greater amount is unknown, if the greater amount is missing, you add because the lesser amount plus the difference equals the greater amount. The lesser amount and the difference, when you put them together, are clearly the same size or have the same value as the greater amount. So you add lesser amount plus difference to find an unknown greater amount. When the greater amount is missing, we add. When the lesser amount is missing, we subtract. The greater amount minus the difference will equal the lesser amount. Finally, third grade, when the difference is missing, we also subtract. The greater amount minus the lesser amount equals difference. It's going to be important, third grade, that you remember how to solve these problems. Once you go to all that work of identifying the greater amount, lesser amount, and difference in the story problem, you have to know what to do to find the missing information. So again, if the greater amount is missing, you add. If the lesser amount is missing, you subtract. And if the difference is missing, you also subtract. Let's test your knowledge. Look at these tape diagrams. They're filled out with numbers, and they have one unknown in each tape diagram. Look at this first tape diagram. Clearly, we know the lesser amount and the difference. We just don't know the greater amount. What would we do to solve this problem? What operation would we use? Would we add or subtract? To solve this problem, we would subtract because the lesser amount plus the difference equals the greater amount. What about this tape diagram? We know the greater amount and we know the lesser amount. We just don't know the difference. How would we solve this problem with a missing difference? Would we add or subtract? You're right, we would subtract because the greater amount minus the lesser amount equals the difference. And then third grade, look at this tape diagram down here. We know the greater amount and we know the difference. We just don't know the lesser amount. What operation would you use to solve this problem? You're right, we would subtract because the greater amount minus the difference equals the lesser amount. Now, third grade, we're going to look at these last three tape diagrams and move a little more quickly. I'm not going to talk to you about each one. You're just going to look at it and think what operation you would use to solve. How would we solve this tape diagram to find the unknown information? You're right, we would subtract because the greater amount minus the lesser amount equals the difference. What about this tape diagram? How would we find the unknown information n? You're right, we would add to solve this problem because the lesser amount plus the difference equals the greater amount. And finally, look here. What would we do to solve this problem? How would we find the missing information n? You're right, we would subtract because the greater amount minus the difference equals the lesser amount. Now, third grade, that we've reviewed how to read and understand compare story problems and also how to solve them, you're ready to solve some compare story problems independently. Have a great day, third grade.